Apache woman, closed her eyes to die, but woke up in a cowboy's bed. Instead, Wild West story. The land was flat for miles. Pale light spilled across the hard-packed earth, brushing the tops of dry grass with gold. The wind moved slow, not howling, just dragging itself over the plains like a tired ghost. Nothing stirred on the horizon but the lazy tilt of vultures circling high. Jacob Walker sat on the edge of his porch, a chipped coffee mug in his hands, steam curling against the cold morning. His ranch stretched wide and lonely, a house that looked too big for one man, fences that needed fixing, and a barn that leaned like it was whispering to the earth. Everything was quiet, except for the creak of wood and the soft breath of his cattle down by the stream. He hadn't spoken a full sentence in 3 days. Not because he was angry. There was just no one left to talk to. The war had taken his hearing in one ear, and the prairie had taken his brother last winter. Since then, silence felt like the only voice he trusted. Then he saw something strange. It was a blur at first, a shape where there shouldn't be one, near the edge of the pasture, just past the old oak where the crows nested. He stood slowly, his boots stiff with dried mud. He brought his hand to his brow and squinted against the rising sun. A figure. On the ground. He didn't run. He never ran, but he moved faster than usual, breath caught in his throat. As he got closer, the shape became clearer. A woman, small and still, her dark hair tangled in the dirt, her skin the color of clay. She wore no shoes. Her dress was torn like it had been caught on every thorn and branch from here to the mountains. She wasn't moving. Jacob knelt down beside her, slow and careful. Her chest rose, barely, just a shallow ghost breath of life. Her lips were cracked, her arms scraped raw. She smelled like smoke and blood and pin. He didn't speak, just slipped off his coat and wrapped her in it. For a long moment he knelt there, staring at her face. There was something quiet in it, not just pain, surrender, like someone who had already walked out of this world and was waiting for the door to close behind her. She had closed her eyes to die, but Jacob, without knowing why, stood up and carried her home. She didn't speak that first day. Jacob laid her on the bed in the spare room, the one with the window facing the barn, and lit the stove nearby to chase away the cold. Her body was limp, her skin fever-warm. She didn't flinch when he cleaned the blood from her arms with a wet cloth, didn't stir when he tucked a blanket up to her chin. She just breathed, shallow and stubborn, like she hadn't made up her mind yet whether to stay alive. He pulled a chair close and sat, elbows on knees, watching her like a man watches a fire he's afraid might go out. Her face looked younger in the lamplight, but her eyes, when they opened just a crack, carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. She turned away from him, not in fear, not even in shame, just weariness, as if she didn't expect kindness and didn't trust it when it came. He recognized that look. Years ago, he had seen it in the face of a boy crouched behind a burning wagon. A boy holding his dead sister's hand. That boy had been Jacob, 15 years old, caked in mud and blood and silence. A survivor, they'd called him. But survivors, Jacob knew, didn't feel like victors. They felt like ghosts who hadn't left. He stared at the woman now. Apache, by her skin and the beads still clinging to the hem of her dress. That alone could bring trouble. Folks out here didn't ask questions. They shot them. He went to the kitchen and poured himself coffee, then dumped it out. His hands were shaking. He wasn't the kind of man who took people in. Hadn't been for years. Since the war, he'd learned how to keep things simple, tend the cattle, patch the fence, keep to himself. Life was safer when no one needed him, and when he needed no one. But that morning, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, just a small, slow turn, like the hinge of an old gate creaking open after years of rust. She hadn't begged for help, she hadn't even looked at him. But she was there, broken and barely breathing, in the middle of his land. And he couldn't walk away. That night, He sat beside her again. The wind beat gently against the windows. He brought a basin of warm water and bathed her feet, careful not to wake her. Each scrape and bruise told a story he couldn't hear, but he listened anyway. As he pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, she stirred, just a little. Her lips parted, not for words, but breath, like her body had finally allowed itself to rest. Jacob stayed in the chair till dawn. And when the sun rose, he stood and whispered, more to himself than to her, "You're safe here. I'll see to it." 3 days passed before she spoke. The fever broke late on the second night. By morning, color had returned to her face. Her breathing steadied. She hadn't eaten much, just a few spoons of broth, but she kept her eyes open longer each day. Still, she hadn't said a word. Until Jacob stepped outside to fetch water. When he came back in, she was sitting up, the blanket still wrapped around her, eyes locked on the door like a wild creature bracing for a trap. "My name is Kaya," she whispered. Her voice was rough, like bark peeled from a tree. Jacob nodded slowly. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He just poured her a glass of water and handed it to her in silence. She took it with trembling fingers, then looked away. Later, she told him. Not in a rush, not all at once, just pieces, like someone leaving stones behind to mark a path she'd never walk again. A mining crew had pushed deep into Apache land, promised jobs, then took what they wanted, water, timber, and lives. Her brother stood against them. He was shot on the back. Then came the threats. They dragged Kaya from her camp as a warning to others, rode her for miles, left her with nothing but bruises and the sound of their laughter echoing through the canyon. They thought she'd die out there. She almost did. Jacob listened without interrupting. He didn't move, but something in him shifted, clenched. He knew the type of men she was talking about, not drunks or outlaws, worse. Civil men with guns and badges, the kind who called theft progress and murder self-defense. That evening, while tending the cattle, Jacob noticed a fresh trail in the dust beyond the ridge. Hoofprints, at least 3 horses, not his. He crouched low, ran his fingers across the marks. They were recent. He saddled his mare and rode out to the high bluff where the valley curved in a crescent. From there, he saw smoke, not a campfire, a signal. Thin, grey, deliberate. It rose from behind the tree line like a message only the desperate would send. They were looking for her. He returned before dusk. Kaya was in the barn, curled in the hay with the barn cat beside her, trying to be invisible. She looked up at him, eyes full of the answer she hadn't yet asked. "They're not far," he said. She nodded once, but her hands trembled. Jacob lit every lantern that night and left his shotgun by the door. The cabin, once quiet and slow, now held the smell of sweat and fear and oil. This wasn't just his land anymore. It was hers too, if she wanted it. But the price of shelter was rising, and danger, real, breathing danger, had started its slow approach through the dark. They didn't speak much after that. The threat hung in the air like dust, always there, even when you couldn't see it. So they filled the days with quiet work. Jacob patched the fence. Kaya helped where she could, gathering eggs from the chicken coop, brushing the mare with slow, careful hands. She walked with a limp, but never complained. One morning, Jacob found her in the shed, sorting through his tools. She held a rusted pistol in both hands, not like a weapon, more like a memory. He stood beside her and didn't ask why. Instead, he opened a drawer, pulled out a box of bullets, and showed her how to load it. They practiced behind the barn. Kaya's hands were shaky at first. She flinched with each shot, but she didn't quit. Jacob adjusted her stance, never touching her, just guiding her with soft words and stillness. After a while, her aim steadied. She hit the tin can on the 3rd try. She didn't smile, but her breathing slowed. That night they sat by the fire in silence. Kaya stirred beans in a pot, and Jacob carved a piece of wood with a pocket knife worn smooth from years of use. Outside, the coyotes called. Inside, time passed gently, like it had nowhere else to go. She broke the silence first. "My brother's name was Lone Tree," she said quietly. "He taught me how to shoot when I was 8. Said it was the only thing a man couldn't take from me." Jacob looked into the flames. "Mine was Sam, younger by 2 years. He died last winter. Froze trying to round up the herd in a blizzard I should have seen coming." Neither spoke after that for a long while. Kaya reached down and pulled the blanket tighter over her legs. Jacob stood and tossed another log on the fire. The flames jumped, casting shadows along the cabin walls. 2 figures, side by side, flickering, but not falling. The next morning, he found her outside, painting small red dots on the wood near the porch. "Protection symbols," she said softly, "from her grandmother's tribe." She didn't ask permission. He didn't need her to. Later, she helped him dig fence posts. Her fingers bled, but she didn't stop. At midday, they sat beneath the oak, sharing a tin cup of cool water. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. Jacob watched the wind move through her hair, and for a moment, just one, the world felt still. He thought of reaching out, thought of saying something. Instead, he placed his hat over her face to block the sun, and she let it stay. In that moment, beneath the oak, dirt on their hands, sweat on their brows, they weren't a cowboy and a hunted woman. They were just 2 people who'd lost too much sitting in the quiet before the storm, and neither wanted to be alone when it came. They came at dawn. 3 riders, dust trailing behind them like smoke from a slow-burning fire. Jacob spotted them first from the porch, just silhouettes against the rising sun, rifles slung across their backs, broad hats pulled low. Not travelers, not neighbors. Trouble. He stepped inside and quietly closed the door. Kaya was already standing, a frying pan still warm in her hand. She didn't ask, just met his eyes. He nodded once. She went to the back room. Jacob checked the shotgun. Loaded. He placed it against the wall beside the door. Then he waited. The ticking clock seemed louder now, like the room itself was holding its breath. Boots crunched on gravel. Spurs clinked. A knock, too polite for men who rode with rifles. Jacob opened the door slow. The one in front, a tall man with pale eyes and a crooked smile, didn't bother with introductions. "We're looking for a woman," he said. "Apache. Stole something that ain't hers." Jacob said nothing. His face didn't change. "Now I figure a man like you don't want trouble," the rider continued. "Hand her over. We'll be gone before breakfast." Jacob studied them. The second man, younger, twitchy, had his hand near his belt. The third hung back, scanning the property like he was already imagining what he could take. "She ain't here," Jacob said flatly. The tall man sighed. "That's unfortunate." He stepped forward, and Jacob stepped between him and the door. There was a pause, heavy, then a sound behind them, the soft creak of the barn door swinging open. Kaya stood there. She held the old pistol in both hands, arm trembling, eyes locked on the leader. The sun caught her face just right, and for a moment she looked like someone carved from stone and fire. "You lied," she said to Jacob without looking at him. "You said I was safe." Jacob didn't flinch. "You are." But the tall man laughed. "Well, look at that. Girl's got fire. That'll burn out quick." He reached for his rifle. Kaya stepped forward, pistol raised. "You killed my brother. You dragged me like an animal." The man sneered. "He pointed a gun at us." Kaya's voice broke, but her hands didn't. "He was 12. The moment cracked wide open. The young man flinched, just enough, and Jacob moved. He grabbed the shotgun and fired into the air. The blast echoed like thunder through the valley. "Drop it," he growled. For a second, no one moved. Then the youngest dropped his rifle. The other two hesitated. Kaya's pistol never wavered. "You'll hang for this," the leader said coldly. Jacob took one step closer. "Then I'll hang." The standoff stretched like wire, tight, fragile, one breath from breaking. Then the second man turned and spat in the dirt. "Ain't worth dying for a girl," and they rode off. Kaya dropped the pistol. Her knees gave out. Jacob caught her before she hit the ground. She buried her face in his chest, fists curled in his shirt, shaking, not from fear, from the sheer weight of survival. He held her close, heart pounding. He had chosen her. And now, whatever came next, he would face it by her side. They stayed on the porch long after the riders disappeared over the ridge. Jacob didn't speak. Neither did Kaya. The world around them seemed to hold still, like the wind and the sky were waiting to see if the danger would return. It didn't. The silence felt different now. Not heavy like before, just hollow, like something terrible had passed through and left behind a deep, quiet emptiness. Jacob helped Kaya inside. She moved like someone waking from a long nightmare, each step unsure, her body remembering fear even though it had already gone. She sat at the table. He poured her water. Neither drank. A long shadow crossed the floor as the sun began its slow descent. Later, Jacob found the cracked beads from Kaya's dress scattered near the barn door, trampled, dull, forgotten by the men who thought they could claim everything. He picked them up one by one, cupping them in his calloused hand. That night, he lit a fire in the backyard. They didn't burn the dress. Kaya wanted to keep it, torn, blood-stained, but hers. Instead, they burned the pistol. It had done what it was meant to do. Now, it was finished. They watched the flames in silence. The sky above was endless and full of stars, but neither looked up. The next morning, they walked to the creek, the same path Jacob's brother used to take when he was alive. Kaya held the beads in her palm. When they reached the bend where the water ran deep and cold, she knelt and placed them into the current. One by one. She whispered something. A name, maybe. A promise. Then she let the water carry the rest away. Jacob stood behind her, hat in hand, head bowed. When she rose, he offered her his arm. She took it, not like a girl clinging to a savior, but like a woman choosing to walk beside someone who had earned her trust. They walked back slowly. A coyote howled in the distance. The barn creaked. The wind stirred the grass like breath through sleeping lungs. No one said goodbye to the dead. No graves were dug. But something sacred had been buried just the same, in silence, in fire, in water. Kaya placed her hand on the cabin door, paused, then turned to Jacob. He didn't ask where she would go. She didn't ask if she could stay. She stepped inside. And this time, he followed. The seasons turned slowly on the plains. Spring crept in with green shoots along the fence posts. Then summer, hot and dry, cracked the soil and darkened the wood of the cabin. The cattle grew restless, the grass grew tall, and the world moved forward. Whether they were ready or not, Kaya stayed. She never said it aloud. There was no moment where she asked, and Jacob never offered. She simply remained, like a stone left in a river, reshaped but unmoved. They built a rhythm between them. Not romance, not quite, but something more lasting. She took to the chickens. He let her handle the ledgers, though she teased him for his numbers looking like wagon tracks. Sometimes they laughed. Mostly, they worked. But every night, they sat on the porch, him with a mug, her with a blanket across her lap, and let the sky talk for them. Once, a traveler stopped by, said there'd been talk of a bounty for an Apache woman, rumors from the mining camps. Jacob stared at him long enough to make the man forget the question. He rode on. That night, Jacob nailed shut the trap-door to the cellar. Kaya watched him do it, then turned and made stew for two. They spoke little of the past, but Jacob some nights would set a second plate at the table, for Sam, for Lone Tree, for whoever never made it home. Kaya, in her own way, remembered too. She started weaving again, long grass into tight knots, twine into bracelets, old cloth into something new. She hung one on the porch beam, red, white, and blue threads tied in a circle. Jacob never asked what it meant, but he touched it every time he came back from the field. One autumn morning, Kaya planted a single tree near the edge of the stream. It grew slow, thin and stubborn, like it didn't quite belong to this land, but had chosen to live anyway. Years passed. The lines on Jacob's face deepened. Kaya's limp faded, but her eyes never lost their fire. They never married, never needed to. What they built was older than paper. One winter, snow fell so thick the world looked erased. Kaya stepped out, bare hands to the sky, eyes closed, face tilted upward like a prayer. And Jacob, watching her from the porch, whispered into the wind, the same words he had spoken that first night. "You're safe here. I'll see to it." The wind carried it. And the tree by the stream stood taller than ever, thin, quiet, and unbroken. They had come from fire and ash, but somehow, in the silence between storms, they taught each other how to stay.